I wanted to give a brief introduction to today's episode. My guests are Dallin and Jackie Cerva, who are the founders of Avrec Art House, an artist community that I had the privilege of being part of for a couple of years. I think our discussion today is a really great case study of art communities, what it takes to start them, and some of the perils and challenges that you might face in the process. This also was the first episode that I had the chance to do in person, and Dallin and Jackie were really cool about hosting me in their home and setting up all of the recording. So don't be surprised if this sounds much better than some of the other episodes. Anyway, I hope this is something that's enjoyable and interesting to you, particularly if you're thinking about starting something similar. How to be an artist. Step 16, a place for art. With guests, Jackie and Dallin Cerva. So I'll kind of set you guys up first with kind of why Avrec is like interesting and important to me, and then I think it'd be really cool to kind of do like an Avrec postmortem. Which,
for real. Sorry
if that's like giving away the ending to people. Maybe not. Maybe it's surprise ending, twist ending. You never know. So in general, I mean, people that want to make art, there's kind of a challenge to making art, and that is that we live in a world that values, materialism and, capitalism. And so there's very much like status is awarded on stuff that you accumulate and like how much money you make, right? So if you decide to make art, the challenge is, your risks of not doing those things are very high, And so that becomes a real like tension for someone who wants to make art. It's like, okay, I want to make art, but then everyone thinks I'm a loser because I'm not making any money. I don't have very much stuff. I don't have as much stuff as other people. And so one of the kind of magical moves you can make as an artist is just to start like building community. Yep. So, I mean, the whole reason why status based on materialism and money matters is because it matters to other people. And so, it matters if other people care about it, you're going to care about it. So there's kind of this magic thing of like, hey, get together a community of people that value art, where that's normalized, like creating art is normalized, and you can gain status on like making art and making cool art, and it becomes easier to do that thing. So what I think is really cool, obviously, about what you guys have done is I've talked a lot about that, but you guys actually like went out and did it. So, and just to give people a little bit of a brief explanation about Avrec Art House as I understand it, it's basically like you guys have used a lot of different words to describe it, but it's like a filmmaker's co-working space, if that's kind of a good way to describe it. But I got to participate on it for, I think, two years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had this theoretical idea about how community ought to function, and I had the opportunity to like feel it firsthand. Like, yeah, that's the way it functioned. You got together with these like-minded people, and it changes how you feel about yourself as an artist when you're able to work together with others. Also, other benefits too. So, anyway, that's kind of my summary of why I think what you guys have done is cool. But anyway, I kind of want to get the story from you guys of what was the genesis of Avrec Art House. What were you guys thinking about at the time? And then we can kind of talk about the life story. Yeah. The life story of Avrec Art House.
Like, just to like catch everybody up to speed of like where the idea originally came from. I've been an artist pretty much my whole life, and then in a very roundabout way landed in filmmaking, went to film school and had some really good opportunities, and like made some short films, made some commercials, played at some film festivals, and so had this idea that it was like, cool, like I'm ready to like enter the professional sphere as like a filmmaker. But there was this idea, there was this question of like, how do you do that, right? Like, I know how to make movies, but then how do you actually pay your bills and make movies, right? How do you become what you want to be? And at that time in Utah, there weren't a lot of productions going on. Like right now, there's a lot more with like some of the TV shows that come out of LA that are shooting here. But at that time, there was just nothing. And we watched as a lot of the people that I had met in film school that had like, become a part of my community and my network, my resources, a lot of them moved elsewhere. They were going to LA or New York, and it's not like they were going and living the dream. They were going and then they were working in these big machines that were like the studio system or doing whatever. Now, a lot of time when people go to film school, they want to write, direct, produce, right? They want to do one of those like top level jobs because those are the creative, powerful jobs in film. And that's what a lot of the people, at least the majority of people who go to film school want to do. And so they were going out and they were definitely making good money and paying their bills working in film, but they weren't doing those jobs, right?
Yeah.
So there was this question of like, well, should we go? Is there any way that our experience out in LA would be different than theirs? Should I go to get a master's degree? And we had like looked at USC and NYU, and I had always pulled Jacquelyn into filmmaking, even though she didn't really go to film school, just because she has managerial skills and she's really great with budgets and finances. And I was like, I kind of brought her in as like a producer / unit production manager for all the little films that we were doing, just like short films on the side. So she was also looking at maybe even getting an MFA in film as well. And, but nothing felt right. Nothing felt, like, oh yes, this is for sure what we should do. But at the same time, we weren't really getting any like clear answer as to like, okay, did I just waste a whole bunch of money on a degree in film that is now just like a very expensive hobby for me? And I was stuck. Like literally, we were just shooting corporate videos. We were shooting wedding films. We were just doing whatever we could to like sort of get some money out of it. And Jacquelyn was working a job that was really keeping us afloat. And then the actual idea for Avrec was Jacquelyn's. So I definitely became the face of it and ran it, but it was really her idea that led it to being what it was. So maybe you should talk more about exactly where that idea came from and the real genesis.
Yeah, so Dallin and I had decided we wanted to try and stay in Salt Lake. That was kind of really the first catalyst. It was like, okay, we're going to stay in Salt Lake City and try to do this because we had the luxury of looking at other people who had moved, and the situation just wasn't what we wanted necessarily. And I had worked the last like 5 years in the gym industry and like fitness gyms,
like running, like kind of running or something to do with that, right?
I
like
started as a
locations.
personal trainer. I'd started and then switched to kind of the business side of it and really, really enjoyed it. And just loved the concept of a large group of people coming together, paying a small fee, but having access to very expensive stuff that you would normally have.
So it was kind of based on like the gym model.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a gym for making films.
Exactly. And that's actually how we pitched it, was a gym for filmmakers. Like instead of treadmills, it's camera equipment. And instead of a movie, well, I guess technically like a cardio cinema, but we just switched it and it was just a cinema.
Without it's like cardio cinema without all the stuff you don't want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And I felt like I had a lot of experience with like ACH, like draws, membership based draws, and knowing how that accounting works and how many members we'd need to break even and what it could really become. And so I felt very comfortable in that arena, so it made sense to me. But the first step obviously was to figure out what already existed here. Like that really was the first step. Is we were like, we're going to stay in Salt Lake. Film's been around in Salt Lake since forever. Like filming those Westerns hundreds of years ago. You know what I mean? Like film's been a part of Utah's history. So we're like, there has to be organizations that already exist. And there were. Yeah. And that was our first step. We spent months. We had meetings with every executive director of every nonprofit that existed. We were trying to find our place. Like why recreate when we can join? Yeah. And we found that really isn't a mentality in Utah, and that's been part of the problem, is the fragmentation. It was so fragmented.
Everyone's trying to do something with film, but they're all in their kind of own spaces. Yeah.
Not talking to each other, some competing with each other and having negative relationships and but then none of them were very filmmaker focused. They were all film organizations that were focusing on different aspects of film, but nothing for the filmmakers. And so what that told me was really the barriers to entry. Like we kind of were going to be the first thing out there of that kind. And we had heard of some little spaces that had kind of opened and closed and things, but we felt like we could do this, you know. It just, I mean, we were young and we were very idealistic, and we wanted to invest in the community. That was an important part for us, was, you know, Austin wasn't always Austin. It was, it took a lot of years of people investing and giving back and coming together and making that base to make it something cool. And so from the research of talking to all the different organizations and really making great connections, everyone was very kind to us and very positive and took our meetings and didn't just treat us like we were these young people that knew nothing, which that speaks to them. Like they just were very supportive and tried to help us, and often our next meeting would come because of our previous one, right? We'd get connections and we'd go down the line. And everyone seemed very supportive and was kind of like, great, if you end up making something, let us know. So yeah, that was really the main starting point, was trying to create what we felt was missing and what we wanted, what we wanted out of a community of where we lived.
Yeah, and I think the shape of it, aside from like the financial structure of like a gym membership, it was really just, you know, as Jacquelyn said, what did we want in a physical space? What would we hope for in a production office, and then make it bigger so it could be shared, right? So that was like edit bays, that was with like top of the line computers and all the softwares the editors need, like the full Adobe suite. You know, audio editing softwares, Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, like all of these softwares that filmmakers need and use on these systems all the time. So someone could just come in, hop on, and there it all is, right? Because that's what I had in film school, where I had these nice computers, you know? And so it was like a private editing suite where you could have an even more upgraded thing with like a couch in the back. So if you're doing a video for, you know, like a commercial for a company, or if you're, you know, if you have like executive producers or people that have funded your film that want to come in and see a cut, that there's like a space to do that in that feels more professional than like bringing someone down into your basement or something like that.
Right. Well, and that was a big thing we talked a lot about, was we toured some art spaces that weren't filmmaker focused, but that were just art focused. And that level of professionalism was never there. Yeah. It was always kind of dirty and just haphazard, broken furniture kind of pieced together, which I get it. Like,
There's a reason for that, right?
No, definitely. Like, and it's not that I think the community and those creative aspects, I think those were serving their purpose. And it wasn't that but with film being such an expensive medium, we just needed something to kind of up the caliber, and then also hope that helped raise up the community as a whole, right? So that we could be making better art together, right? That was a big part of it.
Yeah. And I think that what was really fascinating was in my mind, once Jacquelyn pitched this idea and I was like, yes, this feels like a really cool idea. This is unique. We had done the research and we started building it. I was always kind of pitching this idea to the people that I had gone to film school with, right? The ones that were still in Utah. And trying to get the film schools on board, like, hey, we're building this thing, let your students know, like, this is, you know. And what was really fascinating about it, and sort of disappointing at the beginning, was that, like, everybody thought it was a cool idea, and everyone was like, oh, that's so awesome. But then actually getting people to just come to the space was a whole other thing. Yeah. And getting people to join was a whole other thing. And so we could throw events and people would show up. But what was interesting is our first members were actually not the people that we assumed they would be. They weren't kids right out of film school. They were often, we actually got a huge group of actors who had been acting locally that were kind of sick and tired of acting in the things they were constantly being hired to act in, who wanted to write and create their own stuff. Yeah. Which was interesting because all of a sudden we kind of had to think more educational in a sense. Like, these are people coming who they would be like, hey, I have this script that I wrote, because they know how scripts work because they read them all the time. But then they're like, I don't know how to edit. Like, what do I do? And I was like, this is a new challenge. I did not plan. I thought this would be a space that filmmakers just flocked to, like, immediately, and it wasn't. But there were other people that did. And so eventually we did get experienced filmmakers coming, but they almost took a little bit longer to convince. It was like these hungry actors wanting to get behind the camera for a change were probably our first, like, big group of adopters, I would say.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this before, that you do these big events, and there's tons of people that have, like, their big plans, like, oh, I've got this thing I'm working on, here's this movie I want to make, but then, like, who actually, like, shows up in the space is a much smaller percentage. And I've mentioned this to you before, that it's kind of like there's a little bit of a bullshit filter with a place like Avrec. It's like the people that are really interested in making stuff are the people that show up at Avrec, because they're willing. They know it's
right.
They're paying a cost to do it, so that shows that they really care about making something, right?
I like that, a bullshit filter. Yeah, I never thought of us as that, but
we definitely had one,
and we never called it that, but I remember us saying that, like, sometimes people would join that we were kind of like, they just don't fit the community, but we weren't exclusive that way,
Yeah.
They'd always weed themselves out. It just, they didn't last.
But you look at the people who ended up being, like, kind of committed, and they're all people that were constantly making things, writing things, producing, and it was good stuff. The caliber of stuff that was produced at Avrec was high,
It really was. And it took I say it took a little bit of time to get there, but I think it was just the more we put out content that was like, hey, this was made at Avrec, the more screenings we did, I think the right people began to join, right? And when I say the right people, as I said earlier, it wasn't the people we expected. It often wasn't like the filmmakers that we kind of had our eye on, like, oh, hopefully this local filmmaker who's doing really cool stuff joins. That person almost never joined. Yeah. But somebody else would come that, like, didn't, like, we had a couple people come that, like, didn't know anything when they showed up. And then, like, their first short film, like, a couple of months later was, like, super good. Yeah. And we were like, it was a little frustrating, because I was like, I went to film school, and my senior thesis film, after all that education, was not as good as this thing you threw together that I showed you how to edit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I taught you how this editing program works, and you just, like... So that was kind of cool, actually. Like, it was frustrating, but it was cool.
Maybe there's something about what you guys were doing that's actually a little bit more efficient than what film school does, as far as...
Maybe.
There's a part of me that thinks that a lot, but doesn't say it out loud. But yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I did the 4 year. I did this more than 4 years, but film degree I haven't used. So
right.
Yeah. So what now? What?
Well, I mean, I guess in continuing on with that story, so we ran Avrec for 3 years on our own.
Okay.
And we had tried a number of times to get investors, and at that time it was an LLC. It was a business. And Jacquelyn said we were talking to nonprofit organizations to see what else was out there. Every organization that focused on film in whatever capacity was a nonprofit organization. We thought about becoming a nonprofit, but we didn't know if we even had enough money to withstand the year process that it is in lawyer fees to become a 501c3. And sometimes it can happen faster than that, but most people say it's like 6 months to a year, sometimes even more. Yeah. And we just didn't know if we could do that for, like, this idea that no one had ever heard of anyways. Right. A business, we could just start right away and try it, and we never expected to become wealthy off this idea, but we hoped that the idea would eventually pay for itself, that we would have enough members that it could survive. So we ran it for 3 years, and although the membership consistently grew during that time, and we did find other ways of making income, like we offered workshops that were actually really popular, and we had equipment rentals, but we didn't have like a ton of equipment, and it brought in a tiny bit of money. It was not probably anything to really write home about, but as we were coming up on 3 years, we were not to break even. Yeah. And we weren't even close enough that it felt like we could really survive another year of doing that. Mm-hmm. So we had started the process of, and I say started, we were like starting the process of thinking about it really. And we were talking to some people, but we had basically come to the conclusion, okay, I guess we probably do need to be a nonprofit just because we can't keep paying for this. We were in financial it was rough.
Right.
Yeah.
And we understand the idea that like, obviously nonprofits still need to break even. Like it's not that, we were losing money, so we needed to become a nonprofit. It's just, every organization we talked to, we fit their parameters other than we weren't a nonprofit. And so they wouldn't give us grants. They wouldn't give us money.
Yeah.
And it was like, but we checked all the boxes. Right. So it was like, we just came to the conclusion like, okay, next step, we're going to just shift over.
This is definitely something we can talk about a little bit more in depth later, I'm sure. But, yeah, there's just, I am like more, the older and older I get, the more I'm kind of skeptical about the whole nonprofit like sphere. Yeah. Like they're just like the idea that it's such a big barrier to entry to even get into it. You think about what nonprofits are supposed to be and the fact that it's like only accessible really to people that have the wealth and the time to like form them. And there's also this idea that a nonprofit's kind of this like stamp of approval. That's like, there's nothing shady going on in here.
Yeah.
Right. You know?
Yeah, no, that is a long conversation. I think Dallin and I are both a little jaded towards nonprofits as a whole. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's the system that's set up in the U.S. And,
yeah.
we were willing to play by the rules to keep the community going. Because that year 3, we really had seen a growth in membership and a growth of really cool content being made. And we just couldn't let that die. It just was too special. Like it was worth, we were still at this point probably putting in anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 a month. It depended on the month.
I remember having those discussions with you guys at that time.
I know, yeah. And so it's just like, are we still wanting to do this? Because that's a lot of films we could be making, And so it's like, are we helping the community by doing this, or should we just be making more content? Or it was always this balance of like, we're not making our own art. Are we doing the right thing?
Well, and that's a big part of it too. We were hitting that point where it's like, we need another way to generate income, and no one will give us grants unless we're a nonprofit. Grants aren't really for businesses anyways.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of it. But yeah, as Jacquelyn was saying, we had started this because we were looking for something we couldn't find. Myself anyways, as a filmmaker, I wanted to create, right? Like I wanted to get back to writing and directing movies and to doing that kind of stuff. And I just hadn't really worked on very many passion projects during that time because running this space, creatively thinking, how do we keep it alive? How do I offer new kinds of programming like workshops or whatever, and making sure there was quality control over all that stuff really took up a lot of my creative energy. So I hadn't really written much or directed much in that 3 years. And so it was really a pivotal time of like, 1, how do we keep this going? Because it's awesome and it's working. But 2, is there a way that we can do it in such a way that we could get back to also making our own films? And is that even possible? So yeah, that was a very big pivotal time.
Yeah, and during that same time, we had, I don't know how in detail you want us to go.
Go in detail,
okay.
man.
So we had found another space, because part of the problem is we were in the heart of downtown, which I loved our location.
It's a great location.
So walkable. It just like, we were paying pennies for where we were, but it still was a lot. And so we started looking for other options, and a fellow artist friend of ours was renting a warehouse pretty close. It was right off 21st. And so we decided to make the move there. And like,
I probably wasn't looped in on that, which
it was kind of this whole big, I don't know, it was kind of crazy. So, but it needed work. So Dallin and I were paying rent on both places. But it was so much cheaper there and it was big. It was huge. It was this cool warehouse right on the S line. So like the tracks.
But when she said it needed work, like it needed work.
Yeah.
Like
it was.
There was no heating or cooling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it was very much like a warehouse shell that people had been living in.
So we were working on that, and then it ended up after like 4 months of paying rent on both places and trying to make it work. We just realized it wasn't going to. It just wasn't. It was going to take a lot of money to get it to a place that we could feel comfortable moving our computers, and because it was like roof leaks and some crazy stuff. Yeah. So at that point, you really want to
feel confident at the bare minimum. You're not going to be electrocuted,
exactly,
or die in a fire.
That was like legit.
Right?
No, it was one of those things. And really, one of the big catalysts was that warehouse fire in California. That it was like an artist space.
The ghost ship.
Yeah, and this was a very similar vibe. And we were just like, that was really cool tenants all around, but it was that level of like professionalism that we were just talking about was definitely not there at this spot.
And to be honest, and here's the thing, like I'm going to be as candid in this whole thing as absolutely possible.
Just be careful. Just be careful.
So the landlords, who I don't even remember their names, but the people who owned that building, when we first talked to them, they were very interested in a more professional caliber. Yeah. And they're like, we totally know we need to get this building up to code. There's leaks, there's all this stuff. And then when it came down to, so like we kind of had this like handshake agreement that like we were going to move forward and they were going to move forward and like getting their building up to par. And they just didn't, follow through with their end of the bargain. So we were putting all this money and time in, and they were not fixing things. Like they were trying to put some Band-Aids over like bullet wounds, but it's like, cool, you put in this heater that did get it up to 50 degrees, but that's still not really workable.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they were kind of just like, well, we're not doing anything else. And it was
they got very frustrated with us, and that was the time that we were like, okay, that was a huge moment of like, what's the next step? And it just right around that time, 2 separate organizations reached out wanting to acquire us. And we were very candid and transparent that like this was not a break-even thing. Like we're switching gears. We're trying to figure out whether we find cheaper rent, whatever. And both organizations were like, nope, we want exactly what it is. Like you can't buy, I mean, essentially they were trying to buy that, but that you can't buy what you've grown, right?
Yeah.
What had been created. And so we went down that road with both avenues and ended up becoming part of the Utah Film Center, which is already a nonprofit. They acquired Avrec Art House. They changed it to the Artist Foundry and hired Dallin to take care of the space essentially full time.
Yep.
And so that was 2 years. So that was a 2-year journey of running under their umbrella, and kind of learning the nonprofit world. And it's interesting. It's different. Yeah, it's
interesting is what they say like in a sitcom when someone like, hey, what do you think about like my artwork? And it's horrible. I'm like, it's interesting. And then like,
it's a lot of like game playing and like, and that's that they'll admit to it. And I think any nonprofit, anyone who's worked in nonprofits, like making your nonprofit look good on paper.
They're chasing grants all the time, right? Yeah. Looking for funding all the time, and so they have to do stuff for...
And everything has to be quantifiable, and it's like, man, like...
Who are you impacting? How many people are you impacting? Yep. It's like finding all this like evidence that you're like making a difference, you know?
And by this point, the space had probably 70 filmmakers that were regularly coming and going and doing stuff, but 70 wasn't a big enough number. It just... Which is silly, like it's a filmmaker space that's like impacting, and when you have 70 filmmakers making art, I mean, how many people does that affect? That's hard to quantify, it's high.
And you're trying to quantify something whose effects could be felt 20, 50 years from now, you know? It's like, future value, yeah.
Future value, and it quickly, at this point, I was no longer like actively participating in the day-to-day because they had people that did what I did. That was part of like the benefit of going to a nonprofit, was a lot of the stuff would be taken off our plate.
Well, then they also like pay off all your debts and stuff too. And
no,
they didn't. No. Oh, but they bought the assets. They bought all the assets.
Yeah, they bought the assets,
and you didn't have to keep paying.
Correct. Like
your carrying costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So no, definitely. And then Dallin was making a salary for the first time since film school. Like. And so, we definitely were finally in like a very good financial system, and it felt like our missions really aligned, and they were trying to future-proof. It was kind of what they sold us on, was they saw that this space and investing in filmmakers was the future, because their main thing is screenings, but with streaming and with all these things happening, like their original mission statement was like centered around getting content out to the masses that would normally not be seen. But now all those documentaries are available, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't probably want to get too far down the rabbit hole of Film Center, but
Dallin, go all the way down. Take us all the way down.
I'm totally fine to go down.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like that's what was sold to us.
Right. I feel like both organizations, both nonprofits, both I'll say this, both organizations that were looking at us at that time were saying all the right things in a way. It's
was
just,
the other one was Salt Lake Film Center also?
No, the other
Film
one
Society,
was
whatever it is.
No, the other one was a company. I don't really know how to say what the company was, but it was Vivani.
That's right.
Yeah, and they were a really new company run by kind of the Ruga family, and Jared Ruga was kind of spearheading that, and he had always been very kind and very cool.
They were talking about a space like in the Granary District.
Yeah, they were doing this huge like art like thing, like where they were having music and film stuff, and like also providing like living, like they were taking over a block in Granary. Cool.
Yeah,
and their ideas were awesome, but they were also very big because these people are playing
they're like Walt Disney scale.
Ideas,
right?
These people were playing with much like more money than we had ever really even thought about. And so although they were like saying really good stuff and they were always very kind to us, we just were like, this is probably the sort of thing where like if we sell our organization to them, I don't know if we'll really retain a lot of control over it. I'm sure, I would assume it'll kind of become what they want it to be, which at the end of the day may even be better than what we're doing because they obviously know some stuff, but we're not really sure we're ready to just like give over the reins. And they were talking about like bringing us on, hiring us to continue running it and keeping it what it was, but you just never really know.
And kudos to them for like, they could have just started something on their own. Like they did not need us. Like, and they did the same thing with a local music recording. And rather than just coming in and opening things up, they were acquiring and offering money and putting a value to things, which I thought was that was probably my main like, oh, these guys are cool. They actually want to invest in the community as well.
Yeah, we just didn't know exactly what that would look like in the future. And, you know, people who I think have a lot of resources and who are used to dealing with like, you know, controlling multiple businesses at once. I'm like, this is the sort of thing where like if there's a couple of bad months, they could just wipe it. And it's like not a big deal for them. But for us, it's like everything we've ever created. And it's like our life savings. So we eventually were just like, hey, thanks so much for the offer, but we're moving on to the other offer, which was the Utah Film Center.
Okay.
Another nonprofit organization that, as Jacquelyn mentioned, primarily did screenings. I mean, they have 3 pillars of their organization. One is film screenings, which is she said is about, you know, curating content that they feel isn't readily available to people in Utah. The second is media education, where they have all these programs where they go into like K through 12 schools to teach students how to use filmmaking tools, to teach, you know, instructors and teachers how to use filmmaking tools in the classroom, and to just try and get filmmaking to be more of a language used in education, especially at young ages. And that organization is really cool and does a ton of stuff. Like I'm breezing over what it is, but that's that. And then the other thing was artist support. They always did have this, or not, I don't know if always, but when they were talking to us, they had this artist support pillar, which the only thing they were really doing at that time was providing fiscal sponsorship to local film. Well,
they might be giving small grants to like local filmmakers. Something
it wasn't
like that.
Grants. It was basically say for example, you're shooting a documentary and it has kind of like a social justice theme to it, or you know, that's like the subject. Then a lot of the times the types of people that you're going to want to raise money from are people who are interested in donating money, not investing money. But in order to donate that money, they can't just donate to an LLC, you know,
well, like that. They can, but they want the tax write-off.
They want a tax write-off for it. So a nonprofit organization like the Utah Film Center can come in and be basically a sponsor of that film. So the money can be donated through them, and it's completely legal to do this. There's a number of nonprofits that offer this. So, and then they'll take like a small cut.
I think it's like 5% or something.
Yeah, I think it was 6%, but I think it lowered for us of it ultimately. But yeah, so, and that was kind of what which is an awesome thing. Like providing fiscal sponsorship for films is really great. And that had actually been a great revenue generator for them.
Which was why they were looking at expanding artist support.
Into more artist support.
Yeah, doing Avrec Art House.
So they talked to us about, you know, coming in and being a part of their their organization. As Jacquelyn said, they changed the name. I think someone on their board didn't love the name Avrec or whatever. They wanted it to be something that fit more into their organization, which was weird at first and kind of like frustrating, but like at the end of the day, whatever. Like,
yeah, I never liked the name.
It's
pretty generic.
Artist Foundry.
It felt generic, and it feels like 15 years.
The main problem was
which we found out
the
later.
Same month, the Foundry in like West Valley, or was it just like the west side of Salt Lake City, opened, and it was an artist co-working space.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the cool part of that was it was in an actual foundry, which is why they named it the Foundry.
The Foundry.
And so it was confusing, and it's
like, just kind of really generic too.
Yeah, we had people like showing up there for meetings, and, like calling us like, "Hey, we're here," and we're like, "No, you're not."
And the other, I think it was called the Art Foundry or Arts Foundry. I don't remember. Maybe just the Foundry.
Just the Foundry.
But it was funded and started by like one of Film Center's main donors.
So there was also a connection to
so
that.
Like, that's just weird. Like how did this happen? Kind of a thing.
Yeah,
but
it's bad.
At the end of the day, there was a lot of negotiation at the beginning of becoming acquired or absorbed, as they call it in nonprofit world.
Yeah.
And for me, I was just like, my main thing is I want to make sure that we continue to operate the same way we're operating, that we continue to offer these resources, and that our focus is on helping the filmmakers who are at Avrec right now continue to make films, and that will continue to grow on these short films that are coming out every year. I wanted to eventually start making feature films in that space and supporting artists in that way. And, obviously, as I said, getting back to that myself. So I was like, that's my priority. Therefore, there's all these other battles like the name and what my title
not
is.
Worth it.
That I'm like, I'm not going to die on those hills because I need to reserve my energy to like ensure that this thing's going to continue. So there were a lot of weird things that we just let happen, even though we didn't love it, because it was like, it's not a major priority at the end of the day.
Well, and you've heard of founder syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're conscious of that too, and just trying to not like, because Dallin was the employee, but like him and I were still communicating about all of this, and I was trying to be a balance board and trying to be as involved as I could and trying to see their side of things and not come across as having founder syndrome, and like trying to future proof and be okay with the changes that were happening, so that we not fighting over stupid things that really didn't matter for the end product.
And I think that one of the things that really where things got funky, and I'll talk about pros and cons, right? Like good and the bad, was that we came into this organization, and Jacquelyn had always been, even though she wasn't there all the time, and some of our members didn't even really know who she was, she had always been the backbone of like keeping it afloat, which really mainly fell on her to do, right? Because she's the one with like a job and the only person making money outside of the small amount that Avrec makes. And but she also, and I didn't realize this until I became a part of the Film Center, but she also provided like a bounce board that was really invaluable, because I have a lot of ideas, but sometimes I don't fully think through everything. I'm like, here's this crazy idea, and I can see all the visuals of it, and I can see like what the advertisement is going to look like, but I don't think about like all the steps. And talking through those with Jacquelyn was always so important, because she would help really round out the idea. And it was like, okay, cool. That's really great. She also was great at like reminding me of like when we needed changes done to the website and when we needed to post about certain things, because that was stuff that for me always slips through the cracks. And she also knows how to program a little bit. So like when our website broke and I'm like, I don't know what to do, it's broken, she would like go in and like fix the code, and you know what I mean? I'm like, somehow she picked up, being able to code a little bit. So all those things were extremely helpful, and I didn't realize how big they were, because there was a part of me that was like, oh, like it's gonna suck just me now being a part of the Film Center, and Jacquelyn going off to do her own thing, which is, I think she was ready for that break and wanted to be done kind of with Avrec and get back to her own stuff.
So you know what I'm talking about when I say I want to take a break from.
Oh, 100%. It was like, like signing the paperwork. I was like, I feel like I'm like handing over my firstborn child, but I'm also like this sense of relief, just like immediately came to me.
Because that firstborn child was a pain in the ass.
Yeah, right?
Sometimes kids are bastards,
Let's
guys.
do something else. No.
Yeah, and the whole idea was that she can leave because, and Film Center kept being like, we have everybody here who does this stuff. All the things that she did, people here do, and that's like their full-time job, you know? So I'm like, okay, cool. So we sign the papers, we become the Artist Foundry, I become the Artist Foundry manager under the Film Center, and things continue on as normal. But pretty early on, there was definitely a confusion as to like, okay, well, how do I get all these other people to do what Jacquelyn was doing, right? Like, you guys have a social media team, but they're not posting about us.
Yeah.
You wanted me to stop doing social media, but now nothing's happening on our social media. Like, what? And I remember going back into our analytics, and at that time we were very active on Facebook because Facebook was actually very active within the film community. Filmmakers were using Facebook and creating groups and all that. So I went on to our analytics, and you could just see literally the day we were purchased by Film Center, all of our engagement just stopped. Like, and the few posts that they did do were not getting engagement. Like, nobody was looking at them. At least whatever small group of people, you know, followers that we had, for whatever reason, just no longer were engaging. They weren't commenting, they weren't sharing, they weren't even seeing the
I don't think
posts.
they were seeing it.
None of those. I mean, it's just there's too much of a detachment, right?
Yeah.
You're right in the middle of it. You're seeing everything. You can be so reactive and so sensitive to the stuff that needs to be done. You know, they're in some other office. I mean, they're just not going to have the feedback or the incentive to do as well as you guys ever did, right?
And we did not do that well. Like, that was the irony of the whole thing was, you know, like when you're doing everything, it's so hard.
You're not we are not gurus at anything.
Yeah.
Like, we are not the best organizers. We are not the best, like, so we're far from the best social media people, but it was frustrating to see the fact that there's like a department for this.
Yeah.
And it's worse than what I was doing, just like guessing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how's that possible? And so it would be weird because I'm like, there was no onboarding. There was no onboarding for, I think, the Film Center staff of like, okay, now there's this other organization that we're also going to have to be involved with. And so that was really frustrating because I kept being like, what do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to? And being the new guy, you know, I mean, yes, I had run Avrec for 3 years, but I'm the new guy to this organization. I didn't feel comfortable going and being like, here's what you need to do. You know what I mean? I'm like, who should do this? Like, is there somebody that does this? And at that time, the creative director of the Film Center, who's still there, he was kind of like the guy that was pushing to get Avrec a part of the Film Center, and he was kind of the momentum, right? But he wasn't the executive director, but he was definitely the momentum and this vision of like, Avrec's going to be a part of the Film Center's future. So I kept having meetings with him, and he kept being like, oh yeah, we need to do that. We need to do that. And I know that he would often like write down like that he needed to talk to people. But what happened,
he had a lot going on.
He had a lot going on. And what happened shortly after we became a part of the Film Center was the Film Center had this like major turnover. Their social media person left. Their kind of like operations person left. Their financial person left. Their executive director left. And so within like 3 or 4 months of being a part of this new organization, half the people from the very beginning were gone and being replaced by new people. And so it was a really piss poor time to like be like, here's what I need you guys to do, because these people they were like learning new jobs anyways, you know? And
the big problem was everyone who had negotiated with us was gone.
Yeah, all the people that we had done that because although was the engine behind it, he was not the person that once we became a part of the Film Center, he wasn't involved in those negotiations. And then once we became a part of the Film Center, he was like doing other things. And it just was this crazy time where all of a sudden there's tons of turnover. Ultimately, and now we're like kind of jumping across a couple of years.
Yeah,
it flew by. Really, it was kind of this like messy blur. Becomes the new executive director of the Utah Film Center, and I think that as anybody would in those circumstances, now being in charge of this nonprofit organization and it's a nonprofit organization that's been around for 16 years, and there's a board.
18 years.
18 years. Yeah, I guess it has been 18 years now. 18 years, and there's this board of, people that help, make it run. All of a sudden, your whole entire perspective changes. And I saw a shift in him, particularly toward how he viewed what we were. And it kind of felt like the one guy who sort of saw this for what it was and was pushing it like to be a bigger part of the film center now saw it as, and I'm speaking for him, I don't know if he for sure feels this way, but it seemed like we were like a parasite that was not at break even, you know what I mean? And this is the guy that ultimately has to like go to the board to mention like what we need money for.
Well, and make payroll. It's stressful.
They take out that secret book for the executive director, and they're like, okay, here's the stuff that you didn't know about.
Right. And so
like the budget.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then hits a pandemic.
Oh yeah.
Then we hit COVID, right? And this time and I had a number of odd discussions. Some of them became heated.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, what the crap? And he had, I think, hit a point where he was frustrated with me complaining about the same things all the time. Yeah. That nobody's doing anything, where this this offshoot that doesn't even really get brought into and I was having meetings with people. It just was, you could clearly see that the priority for this organization and the way that everybody operated served film screenings. That was kind of how it ran. Marketing knew how to deal with film screenings. All these people, the development, the people who go out and raise money, they knew how to support this organization that screens films. I don't think they ever fully came around to even understanding or even thinking about, and that may be unfair, but this is just from my perspective, but even thinking about how to support an organization that supports local artists.
It's just they had gained experience over their years of existence about how to do one thing well enough to survive.
Totally.
And then here's this whole different beast that has different needs that you're trying to mix in with that.
And the media education, which, is the whole other, that third arm.
Which was also absorbed. It was a separate organization that got absorbed 3 years before us.
Right.
Okay.
But when they were absorbed, they were fully funded on their own because they started as a nonprofit organization. And if you're an organization that supports kids, right? Art for kids.
Yeah.
The amount of grants and opportunities that are available to you are just a lot more than we're trying to support
adults, which I'm I have mixed feelings about.
The opposite of a bullshit filter, it's a bullshit magnet. It's for kids.
You can definitely say that. Here's my thing is the people who ran the part of the education team were so cool. They were some of the best people, and I know that they had concerns similar to us because they were here we are, this awesome part of this organization, but everybody's focused on screenings, And in my world, I'm the most interesting stuff Film Center does are these other two arms, these other two pillars. Media education, I thought was actually really cool in that they're, teaching people how to use filmmaking tools. I'm man, if I went to a school where people were coming in and here's a camera, we're going to show you how to make a short film. And instead of a book report, you're going to make a short film about this thing that you read, and your teacher is going to be totally okay with that. I'm that would be awesome. I'd love to go to I'd love to be that second grader, So I thought it was really cool. And the people that ran it were always really awesome and lovely. And then, obviously I care a lot about artist support. So, but ultimately it just was this weird thing. So COVID hits, and we're in the middle of a film festival at that time, that not ours, the sort of Film Center does these big festivals, and they kind of it's an all hands on deck situation where it's kind of stop worrying about what you're actually hired to worry about, and let's make sure these festivals are awesome, which I always had mixed feelings about because I'm how are these festivals helping local filmmakers? And sometimes they did actually, because they would screen local films, but it's just, my focus was so set on what I wanted to accomplish that it always felt like I was being pulled away to be a part of the team, and then I'd go back into my cave, right? But anyways, the COVID hits, that festival gets shut down halfway through it, everything closes up. And I mean, at that time, that wasn't really a huge deal because I think everybody was freaked out and nobody wanted to go into a physical space anyways.
And I had I had left Avrec. I mean, just like a couple months
right before
before.
that. Right before. You got out at a good time.
Actually, it was actually not that too long before
like
that happened. It was like a month before. Okay, yeah.
Right, and so we close up, and
no one was at the space for a while.
No one was, the space was basically shut down, but I was still thinking like, okay, everybody has to start thinking differently. Like, how are we going to survive? And at that time, we're all thinking like, we got to figure something out for a couple of months, right?
Yeah.
While COVID's happening. Little did we know that it would be this like ongoing thing at that time.
Never-ending story.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we started to I created this like Monday night movie night where basically we would find a movie that was streaming on one of the major streaming services, and like at 9:00 we'd all hop on like a Zoom call to just like talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And we would have those discussions be kind of guided. Like one of our workshop leaders, like Cole or Bianca Klein or somebody, would always pick the movie and then lead the discussion. But it was very informal. It was literally just to keep this idea of a community going, right? Because those are the things we talked about in the space. It was always, oh, did you see this movie? And, that was like how everybody wasted their time
exactly.
while they were trying to get work done.
That was the best thing and the worst thing about it.
Exactly. And that's how it is.
Really.
So we wanted to keep that alive, obviously. So we did that, and then Film Center was trying to figure out like, okay, how do we now stream our movies instead of like play at the screenings, because we can't do that. And they were trying to figure it out, and we had actually just done a screening of all the short films made by Foundry members during the year of 2019. So I was like, well, we can show this again, because we actually had a very successful screening. We had like 211 people show up, which is, decent numbers.
Yeah. And this is actual screening.
Yep.
That was a physical screening, but I
screening.
knew a lot of people were texting me like, oh, I wish I could come, but I can't make it tonight or whatever. So I'm like, there were a lot of people that wanted to come that couldn't. We could use this one as a guinea pig. I already have all the movies digital format. Like, just pick the place where we're going to screen it. Like, how are we going to do it tech wise? And we can set up a Q&A. Like, everyone's ready to go pretty much. And so we did that, and we actually had another super successful screening.
Wow. And this is all online.
All online streaming.
Awesome.
It was the very first one that Film Center, it was the first one out of the gate for them, right? It was their guinea pig. And we had it set up so that like we would do a Q&A after, and I kind of ran the Q&A, and then Davey, who was kind of the manager of programming, was kind of running the like behind the scenes, like all the tech stuff, bringing people in at the right time, letting them off and all that. And, he was always really good at that sort of stuff. And so it ran smoothly. It was this awesome event. And, in the back of my mind, there's all these organizations that are like declaring bankruptcy and mentioning that like they're closing down parts of their businesses or whatever. And so I'm like, well, look, at least we did this awesome screening.
And how did this compare to their other streaming?
It was the first one, but
it was the first one,
it
but
did do well.
As far as I could tell from looking at the other numbers, it was their most attended screening.
Okay. That makes sense. I'll say just
because of locals, right?
Yeah, I mean, because it's relevant, it's unique.
Yeah.
You think about everything else. I mean, case in point, I remember getting one of their emails. It's like, oh, here's the stuff we're streaming, and so I look at them and I'm like, I wonder if these are available anywhere else where I don't have to pay like something to see them.
Right.
And I found one on Hulu, and I'm like, I just watched on Hulu, but it's like, like local stuff. Like unique,
you
can't see it anywhere else.
Art. Yeah.
It's people you're connected to.
Totally.
Like it's
And it was great. I can't remember the final number, and at that time it was weird because you were counting households rather than individual people, right?
Yeah.
But I think I can't remember. We were in the hundreds, but we had like 100 something households, and it was awesome. I was like, that's
cool.
so great.
You felt kind of safe, huh?
I felt safe because I was like, obviously people care. People in this community care about local film, and they care about the stuff that we're putting out. And that's awesome, right? And so we kind of move forward into COVID, and, Film Center's trying to figure out their stuff. I'm continuing to do the Monday night screenings, and we're also doing workshops again. We're just doing them through Zoom, which worked out for most of our workshops. There were certain ones we couldn't do without being, face-to-face. And so I was just trying to basically keep things going, right? And hopefully COVID would be over someday. And after a couple of months, people started emailing like, hey, like, what are your plans for opening the space again? And there was a part of me that was like, yeah, I don't know. And here's the thing is I created a survey and sent it out to all of our current Foundry members at that time just to really see like who's ready to come back with restrictions, obviously, and who's like not exiting their house right now. And it was all over the map. Like there were people that were like, oh, I'm totally ready. Like I don't even care about masks. Like let me in there. And there were other people that were like, I haven't left my house and I don't plan to. You know what I mean? So it was like, okay, I don't know what to do, but luckily I'm a part of another organization. It's not all on me. There's actually there's a leadership team at the film center, which I was not a part of, but it was this 5-person team of directors. I kept putting together these potential plans. Like here's the survey results. Here's what people are saying. And then here's some opportunities. Like option 1, we could do it this way. Option 2, we could do it this way. We could just limit the amount of people. Like maybe they have to reserve just going in for the day. Like we limit only 5 people in the space for the entire day, stuff like that. And
I'm sure at this point they're seeing things in a totally different way. They're like, here's our opportunity.
Yes.
And it wasn't good that we signed our lease in August, so it renews in August every year.
Right.
We signed up for our computer lease in August. So, so Dallin's presenting these plans in June, July, and I didn't even think about it, but everything was coming to an end.
Everything was okay.
Exactly.
So
it was perfect timing, really.
Yeah.
So and I'm not sitting here saying that they're scheming, right?
No,
I have issues with how things went down with the film center.
They could have been more transparent with you.
Yeah. Totally, but the timing wasn't really. That just is how it happened.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying they were scheming this, but there was definitely I was sending these ideas in and it was okay, cool. Leadership team will take a look and we'll let you know. And then I just wouldn't ever hear anything. Yeah. And I'm that's fine. If we're not going to open, that's totally okay. I just want to know what to tell my members. So every month I just kept being hey guys, we're still closed. And we weren't charging people, obviously. I just every month would go in and block everybody's payments, but I wasn't closing anything down because I'm we're going to get back eventually to whatever that looks like. And come July, Patrick, I had started having some conversations with Patrick about changes, and he was basically, I assume, meeting with all the program managers. I was the one over the foundry, right? To figure out what's the future hold, since we've been closed for so long, and since we also don't know what the end of COVID is even going to look like, if it exists. And so I had, gone into that meeting with him and was pretty willing to change things. Honestly, the only thing I wasn't really willing to change was that we focus on local filmmakers. We're helping local filmmakers get content made, and that we're trying to provide really quality stuff, right? I mean, that's really what I wanted to be able to offer.
Yeah.
And so we talked a lot about tons of different scenarios about what it could look like. And maybe even moving to another space that was smaller or cheaper. And I didn't love the idea, but I was willing, right? It was just whatever we have to do. At the end of the day, I can't control COVID, right? And then I got a phone call. I guess, I don't know if it was a phone call or if it was a Zoom meeting or something, but something was happening early. It was July 2nd or something like that. And he was touching base after having had some meetings with me to kind of here's the next steps. And this conversation is one that I think is probably the most frustrating conversation that I've had with him or anybody from that organization. And it started off with him just asking a lot of questions, but very obscure questions, very bizarre. He would say what would you say is the busiest time of the day at the
They're all kind of these leading questions.
100%.
Leading.
So
That's
trying
the right
to get
word.
you to come to the conclusion.
I felt like I was being baited into something, right? And there was a part of me that wanted to be just say what you want to say. What are you getting at, But it was how many people are in the space at this time of day? How many people are in the space at this time of day? And exactly how many people is that? Yeah. And it was sort of to try and lead me to this conclusion, I assume, of being we're just not serving enough people, basically. Yeah. And
so that you would fire yourself.
I don't know, I guess, but eventually I wasn't taking the bait. I just kept answering the questions, but I kept being and this was honest. I wasn't really trying to defend myself as much as just 100% be honest. Our space changed all the time. There wasn't a season that was busier than the other. There wasn't always a time of day that was busiest. If I had to pick a time of day, it was probably noon to 5 seemed to be really busy for some reason. But there was always this nighttime crowd that came in after 7 p.m. And some days they wouldn't. And so it just was like completely bonkers. It was all over the place, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately I was supposed to come to the conclusion that we're just not hiring or we're just not helping enough people. Therefore, it's time to close the foundry. And I wasn't taking that bait. So he finally just said it. Right.
Yeah.
And I kind of sat there for a second and just was like, okay, you know, what does that mean? And he said, well, we want to continue supporting artists in some way, but we don't know what that looks like. And he threw out this idea that maybe they'll do something like, you know, they won't provide a physical space, but maybe in their office, which is in a different location than what the foundry is, they might have some edit bays and they'll select maybe 10 films, not necessarily filmmakers, but potentially filmmaker groups that have like a project. But they'll select maybe 10 or so projects every year and support them in letting them maybe come into that office to use an edit bay. Or maybe that there would be like a small grant at the end of them making a movie. Like maybe they would make a movie and then they could, or maybe they apply beforehand. I don't really know. And none of this was set in stone anyways, but there would maybe be a little bit of money, like $5,000 or something.
Well, and it was essentially like, let's take the money we normally would have spent on rent and help fund projects.
Yeah.
Which the idea in and of itself is not a bad idea.
I didn't really have major issues or qualms with these new ideas. Yeah. The only thing was that this was all very unknown. Like there was no guarantee of this actually being what happened. And then I asked the question of like, okay, well, where do I stand? What is my new role? And he said, well, obviously you'd be involved in that, but we would probably have you support the other programs in just whatever way, like however we need you kind of. So I'm like this sort of roaming helper person. Yeah. And they said, plus like,
Which is nice that they wanted to keep paying you. They
totally
weren't trying to fire you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
But, and they said, you also make videos. So, you've always made so many videos for the Foundry, which I'm like, yeah, that you guys like always never shared. But like, sure. But like you could make these videos, for the other programs and like help support that. And it was like, I was looking back to like when I first graduated from film school, and it's like we did have a company making corporate talking head videos, and I probably made a lot more per video than I would ever make it at the salary of this place anyways. And that just wasn't my passion anyways. I had to go back to why I created this place. Is it awesome that they might offer grants to local filmmakers? Yeah, that is awesome. Like 100% good for you guys. But I just felt so unsure about my role in that and what that would look like, especially considering the fact that when we started off with these guys 2 years ago, it was very clear what things were going to be like, and then they weren't at all like that. Yeah. So I just was like, cool, I think I'm done.
How long did it take you to, was that in that conversation?
No, I knew in my head immediately. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm done here. But I didn't want to say that. I wanted to sit and think about it and not make a rash decision. So yeah, like we went out of town. I took a couple of days, and then I eventually called him back and just, told him, I hope they do something. I hope they continue to support artists, however, and whatever that looks like. But I think I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. This is, I told Dallin this. I don't know if I've told you this, but also for the listeners. But so this reminds me a lot of the first game place I worked at was EA Salt Lake, which used to be a studio called Headgate that was founded by a guy named Vance Cook. And he's kind of this like he was a like programmer, and it was started to make this thing called Pentacalc, which is like this calculator program. But and he would take his employee, like when he first started this company, it was 15 employees, and like every year he would take them on like these crazy trips. Cool. Have I told you about this before? No. And he'd be like, okay, guys, you can choose wherever you want to go, but it has to be someplace where there's a risk of us dying. And they did. One of the original 15, like I'm good friends with, and he's told me like they did this trip to like Papua New Guinea where they were staying with this tribe, and they were like hunting, processing taro, they call it, like in the jungles, and hunting pigs, and they ate maggots and stuff. But anyway, so. They built this company up, and eventually they started being a contractor for Sierra Games. Remember Sierra Games? I don't. Because the old video game company used to make stuff like Day of the Tentacle. I don't know if you remember that, but anyway, a different era,
wrong crowd,
different
honestly.
era of gaming. This is like way back in the day. So anyway, but eventually after working as a contractor for Sierra for a while, Sierra acquired them, bought them for however much money. And after a while, things weren't looking good. And so they shut down the studio, right? So the studio was shut down. And so Vance's whole thing was just like, well, I'm just going to hire everyone again.
Yeah.
And so he just hired everyone again. He started up Headgate again. And then a few years later, they start working as a contractor for EA. And then EA buys them for however much money.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And, however many years later. And so that's when I was at EA Salt Lake. I mean, a few years, I think, after they were acquired. So, which was cool because the culture there was still like kind of this like more small and energetic. And I watched that slowly, like it's drained out. But anyway, eventually like EA Salt Lake, they shut down that studio too.
So he sold the same thing twice.
He sold the same thing twice.
So what are you saying, Brandon?
Well, so I just think it's so interesting that, I mean, did this thing suddenly like change in value, millions of dollars, like 4 times? And it's like, what were they actually buying? Like they bought this thing and they shut it down, but his connection to those people like continued. So I look at Avrec and it's like, what did the film center really buy from you guys? They bought a bunch of junk. Like the actual value of Avrec was like in the connections, and they never actually owned that anyway. And still like that network still exists. And I know you guys are already talking about like, how do we, start something up again, right?
I mean,
and it won't be the same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, but
yeah, no, I like that idea. There was definitely right when it happened, Dallin and I went into the space and got all of our stuff out. And kind of had it. I felt like at the time it was very cathartic, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." And we got to say goodbye, which a lot of people which a lot of people wouldn't get that opportunity. That has all the
bricks around it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, my pillar. No, I didn't say goodbye to that.
Okay.
No, I felt good. Like initially, I think we both were just kind of like, okay, like it's a pandemic. It's no one's fault.
Yeah.
Like, was it a little surprising that like we were the ones to get shut down? A little bit. I was a little bit shocked, but I guess it confirmed in my head that really their focus was never going to be local artists. It just wasn't. And that's okay. Like they probably were doing too many things, and like they have a niche and go for it. Mm-hmm. And so like that's kind of was my thinking, and I'm like, oh, and so we started doing Zoom calls with people from the community and like trying to figure out
a lot of our members.
Yeah, our members, and trying to figure out next steps and like should we find another space and all this stuff. And then that kind of fizzled just because the cost and COVID's still going on, whatever. And that's, I think, when it finally, like, I think I'm still going through the stages of grief for sure. Yeah, for sure. Like, it was like a little bit of denial. I'm probably still in that anger phase. Like, I'm just kind of mad. I'm just mad that there's so many, like, film-focused organizations in the state that get millions of dollars of funding but don't help the artists. I don't get it.
What are they accomplishing besides just showing films from someplace else that already really have distribution channels, right?
Truly. Like, at this point in time. So then it's been that same conversation of like, should nonprofits live for 20 years without being able to change? And, like answering those questions in my mind of like, and I had done a thesis, well, it's not a thesis, like a term paper, 2 semesters back. I'm getting my MBA right now, and I took a nonprofits class because I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to, and I was one of like 2 MBA students in the class, and it was frustrating. It was a frustrating class. It just nonprofits are their own thing, and my term paper was why Salt Lake Film Society and Utah Film Center should not both exist. Like, they literally have the same mission statement. Mm-hmm. They have different sources of funding, but same audience. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you're getting yours mostly from Zap, and you're getting yours. There's enough money for you both to exist. But at the end of the day, Salt Lake is what, 200,000 people? Mm-hmm. Like, do you think we have room for 2 nonprofits that their sole focus is screening movies? Yeah. When we have Netflix and Hulu.
And what are they doing that's like unique to Utah too?
Right.
It's something that you could put in any other city in the country and it would look exactly the same, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And, either one, like I know Salt Lake Film Society, they're trying to grow like their artist support and trying to do things. But at the end of the day, I mean, all their financials are online. It's public knowledge. You can look at them and see the decline over the last 5 years for both organizations. And both are operating in the red. And I don't know. I can't speak. I mean, I'm sure anyone from those organizations that would be listening to this would be frustrated and whatever. But at the end of the day, that's a perfect example of they just are two boards and two organizations that kind of hate each other and don't want to work together, but are taking $2 million in funding plus, and none of that is going to local art being created in Utah, which is sad to me. I don't understand it, and I'm not saying I am an expert on this. I'm really not, but now that Dallin's not with them, I probably will get my teacher involved and publish the paper, because
I think you say you're not an expert, but I think you have an expertise in this that very few people have, in the sense that you guys actually have invested in trying to create something, and you guys know specifically the challenges and the rewards possible by doing that. How many other people have that experience,
right? Well, and there was always question, a couple of our members asked us right when we closed up, so what's round two? What do we, you know what I mean? And at the end of the day,
I'm taking a nap.
I know, right?
Kind of, or at least I'm just I'm not going as big as I was before, because, these acquisitions that we got from, the money that we got from the film center wasn't even enough to cover the debt we had gone into to create Avrec Art House.
Yeah.
It was a drop in that bucket. And so it was we have never been rich people. We're not wealthy people. And we were kind of trying to play in a sphere that mostly wealthy people play in, which is the creation of these types of things. Mm-hmm. And it was just because we cared a lot and we had access to a community and we wanted to see it survive. But okay, now it's all said and done. The only reason that we're not in financial peril is because we've sold our own properties, right? We buy the houses that we've bought, we've fixed them up on our own, and then we've sold them for good sums of money because that market's really good right now. That's the only reason that we're not super broke from having created this stuff.
Yeah.
And so am I gonna go start it again? No, dude. I'm not. It never, it was awesome. What we created was amazing. I know for a fact that we had a huge impact on some of the local filmmakers. I know for a fact that a lot of those films that were made at that space would not have been made, or at least would not have been made with anywhere near the amount of quality had we not existed. But we don't have the financial means to continue creating that sort of stuff. And so it's really been a period of time where, we're going through that mourning process. And I think after we realized that we couldn't start something like that up again and bring all the same people with us for round 2 or round 3, I guess, that was really when, for me, the mourning process began, or at least I was past the denial phase.
Yeah.
Because then I was like, okay, it did close and it is over. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
So, and the reality too is that, filmmaking is a complicated art form because unlike a lot of other art forms, you can't just go do it.
Yeah.
You can't just be cool. I mean, I guess if
requires
you're making
coordination and collaboration
and a lot of people, which
money,
lots of money, lots of people, and money is something that's complicated right now because there's an economic impact to COVID, and so a lot of people that have extra money may not be willing to put that toward film right now. And I had a conversation with Jacquelyn Dreyfus, who is actually the founder of the Film Center, but isn't heavily involved anymore. She sits on the board, but. And she was just saying, for the no-name, low-budget filmmaker, it's going to be, a major impact. We're probably not going to see that part of the market start to, rebuild itself for 5 years or so. So, I mean, can I go grab a camera or can I grab my iPhone and go shoot some things and call it art and put it up on YouTube? Of course I can. Anybody can do that, and that's lovely and beautiful, but there's so much of that kind of thing. There's not really a way to pay your bills or to be a professional doing that. I mean, I guess a few people do figure out how, but if what you love is that filmmaking, that culture of I'm putting something together, we're lighting it beautifully, we're bringing in actors, we're really doing justice to a film.
The collaborative part of it is part of the beauty of it too.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that makes it. I mean, that's when I think back on my experience in film school. that was like the best thing about being at BYU was being involved with this community, helping on. Everyone had to help each other out with projects, you know. Yeah, it's part of.
And that's not to say that I'm done with filmmaking, because I'm not. Like, there's still films that I want to make. You have to be creative in like, how do we make this? How do we keep people safe? How do we simplify it? You know, and we've started talking about that. Like, we're putting some content together. We're buying some camera equipment, really cheap stuff, and we're thinking about, you know, making some movies with a very, very small crew in some like property or some place that we own or have free access to. Whether or not that will ever doing that kind of stuff will ever help you pay your bills, I don't know. This industry is very weird that way, but
I don't think you can ever, anytime you're talking about making art and you're talking about artistic community, you kind of have to divorce the making of the paying of the bills from the making of art, right?
You kind of do. And that honestly, I know it may sound like kind of dumb, but I don't think we realized that till this year. Like, I know that sounds a little crazy, but like, it's like, well, then why do all these film schools exist if there's no career path?
I went through years of, you know, trying to make a comic book before I finally realized, like, yeah, it's hard to do both of those things. But that's a good point. Why do film schools exist? Like, it's honestly, it's kind of dumb that, like, first of all, this goes back just like universities, college, and that we think that everything it's all homogenous, that it's like everything fits in the same little package, that art's going to work the same as engineering, is going to work the same as whatever, all these other, you know, there's things that make you money and there's things you study that do not make you money.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, and it kind of seems like this whole big, because even like, oh, maybe Dallin will go teach or something, and it's like, do you want to be part of that system? Like, it kind of seems like deceiving. And one of the big eye openers for me this year was that interview with the filmmaker.
Yeah, Shane. I don't remember how you pronounce his last name. It was like Caruth or something. He was the guy that made Primer. Back like about the time you were getting out
like
of film
the grand jury prize at Sundance.
And he made like it was like an $8,000 production budget, but it was that movie about time travel.
I remember the name. I never saw it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's complicated. Like, it took me 3 times before I was like, oh, I get what's happening.
Okay. Yeah.
It was very cool. But he did an interview why he's going to make one last film and then he's out.
Yeah.
And it was essentially, he can't get money to make the films he wants to make. And I'm like, you win Sundance, which is like, getting into Sundance, the chances are what? Like, we have a better chance of getting in the NBA.
For a feature, it's like a 1.2% chance, and for a short film, it's a 0.02% chance.
And it's like, and then to win it, like, which is insane, and you still can't get investors and studios to give you the money to make your art, then what is the point? Because he can't pay his bills with it.
This is something, I've been thinking a lot about, is that people think a lot about breaking in, and they don't realize that, like, breaking in is not a permanent condition.
Right.
And this is a story I've heard quite a bit. The guy's name's escaping me, the guy who's the showrunner for Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if you guys remember.
Yeah.
That dude's name. He's like did a bunch of Star Trek stuff. Okay. But anyway, I read something about like he hasn't been able to like land a new series since doing Battlestar Galactica. You know, and there's no guarantee. Even once you break in, there's no guarantee you're gonna stay in. Right. So.
And that's, I mean, like, for me, there's this bigger disenfranchisement with like art in general. But one of the things, and this is like a little bit of a change of, not subject, but I guess change of like artistic medium, was that like when COVID hit and we were working from home, and it's like, how do you work from home and put in all this time? Because a lot of my time was helping filmmakers with their films and taking meetings with people, which like a lot of people just weren't making things at that time because they're like, who knows what's going on? You know, we can't even go on a set anyways. So I had extra time, and I have always been a musician, right? Like, I've always played in bands, and, well, not always. I did when I was in high school. To be totally honest, I haven't for a long time, but I collect guitars and I write music, and it was always just for fun, right? But I looked around and I'm like, I kind of have all the stuff in my house to record an album, at least totally digital kind of a thing. And so I was like, you know, I've got this free time. I want to do something creative. So I kind of sat down, started writing music, and putting together this album. Jacquelyn came on because she's also musical and learned all the bass parts and sang some backup and even wrote the lyrics for one of the songs. And all of a sudden we had this like full length album and we're like, well, this is cool. And so we got it like professionally mixed and mastered, and it like turned out better than I think I ever thought it was going to. And so that was, and
what's the name of the album so people can check it out?
Yeah. The album is Flicker.
It's on Spotify.
It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Music. It's on everything, right?
Yeah.
Like it's on all the big stuff that you can go and get an album, download an album on. But the band name is No Shooting Friends Joseph, which is a line from Unbreakable, the movie. It's a weird line, but No Shooting Friends Joseph. The album is Flicker. It's kind of like a 90s emo, sort of like early 2000s post-hardcore kind of vibe. The sort of music I listened to in high school, and anyways. But what was crazy about that is after creating that album, I sat there and I was like, I didn't need to raise a bunch of money. I didn't need to gather a whole bunch of people and have meeting after meeting to make sure we're all on the same page. I didn't need to like rent all this equipment. I literally just spent a considerable amount of hours, and at the end I had something that I was pretty proud of.
Yeah.
And that was revolutionary for me because although I was aware that other art forms existed, I hadn't dabbled quite like I had in film. And in film, I have never been able to just go and do that. You have to check so many more boxes before you can come up with something that you're proud of. And that's not to say that I'm like, oh, cool, I'm a musician now, I'm not going to make films anymore, because again, I can't pay my bills as a musician. It's not like people are flooding to go buy our album. Like, people are listening to it, but you don't make money off of people listening to your album.
I had no idea. 1,000 plays is like 60 cents.
Yeah, all that stuff is just
pitiful.
Like the only way to make money as like a musician is to tour and play at venues, which you can't do right now anyways. So it's not like I'm choosing a new career, but it was just like, in terms of art, what really saved me in going through COVID and then also ultimately the closure of this space that we had dedicated 5 years of our life to, and not just 5 years of our life, but like all the extra money we ever had, and who knows, you just never really get that back, was diving into this other art form.
Yeah. The metaphor that's been really helpful for me lately in thinking about art is, maybe this isn't a metaphor, maybe this is just like an accurate description, is just like, it's this like spiritual pursuit. It's like, you want to go like see the face of God, you want to make that your life's work, like, great, but you're not going to get paid to do it.
Right. I like that metaphor. And that really has been a silver lining to all of this headache, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be Avrec closing, is I think both of us are creating more than we ever have.
Oh, good.
And I don't know why. I maybe just the day-to-day stress of not having the space and it just freed up some mental capacity. Maybe I don't know. I haven't asked why, but it's been really nice that we're both kind of working on our own projects and moving forward with that it would feel a lot more empty if we didn't have those to rely on.
Yeah. You said something earlier where you're like, oh, is this thing just a hobby? And I think it's getting back to this idea about how our culture affects how we value art and how we think about making art. And that I think like the word hobby is this especially like contemptuous term, that it's like things that we do that aren't making money are like hobbies. It's like we're building little toy airplanes or something, and being able to conceive of life in a different way of like, the purpose of my life is to create art, to make things meaningful, to have meaningful connections. And part of that is paying the bills. But getting those priorities right,
it's hard,
that like it isn't about paying the bills, like that. The purpose isn't that, but that's
well, and
100%.
I guess the part of it that I struggle to reconcile to this day, and I don't know, maybe I will for the rest of my life, is just that, like obviously Jacquelyn and I have been married for 11 years now. We obviously believe in the idea of life partnership, whether that's marriage or whether that's just like finding somebody that you spend your life with. But for me, I'm like, there's no way I would be able to accomplish what we've done. And again, when I say accomplish, that's not financial gain. That's just like stuff I can say I created. But there's no way I would be able to do any of that stuff if Jacquelyn were as much of a creator as I am. Like there's a major benefit to me, that's the fact that she's entrepreneurial and that she is capable and has a number of skills that are extremely marketable to people willing to pay money for it. That she's able to, you know, work a job where she gets a great salary, and then when she quits that job and goes freelance, she has a skill set that people want to pay her for stuff. Because if we were in a different financial situation, or if I was married to like a fellow, like just somebody who wants to like write and direct, like we would be so broke. Like one of us would have to get some other kind of job,
right?
You know,
but
like
I think the entrepreneurial side of it, that's the reason we tried to create the community. That's the reason. Like if we were just both doing that, we would have never put that much money into that.
It's a thin line between an entrepreneur and an artist.
Yeah, and it really, truly, it just like, and that's a big part of it, and probably why our dynamic works is I don't feel that different whether I have 20 grand in the bank or $200. I really don't. Yeah. And I know that's a weird thing.
That's a good thing.
But I'm willing to take risks. And I mean, I see the benefit of having to be able to like have a roof over our heads, have food, all that stuff is important, and we're always going to have that. And I'm getting more responsible. Like we have a savings account now, and like it's like the emergency fund that I don't touch, you know. It's like we're trying to become more grown-ups and like figure stuff out, but I'm also just like, you know, you have to spend money to make money, and that all that.
Yeah, another metaphor I've been thinking about lately that I really like is that it's like, you know, there's art is about going up in the clouds, right? It's about going in the sky, the spiritual realm, and it's like, how do you get into the sky? And you look at like, I like the metaphor of a tree. Like, how does a tree get into the sky? Like, it has to start with like the roots. It has to start being grounded and having some sort of foundation, you know. And this gets to like you know, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like you got to start with like safety. And so like as an artist, just having like safety, having the bills paid, having all that stuff like taken care of, like it frees you up to be able to like expand, you know, up into the branches, get up into the sky. And I've spent time in places where that foundation didn't feel very secure, you know, and it's a lot harder it's more like feels much more like risky and tenuous, you know, and you're like not sure what's going to happen, but
well, and I think I think the pandemic has been something that's caused a lot of people in a reflection and trying to reevaluate their lives and doing all of that. And that's been a big thing for me, in that like anybody can make money. I truly believe that, whether it's a $10 an hour job or
some people are better than others at it.
No, definitely. But like, could Dallin go get an hourly job right now? Definitely.
Sure. Yeah.
But can everyone make the art he can? No. Like I truly believe that. And like, I don't really care if the world values it, because I value it. And I like it when he's creating, he's happier. Our marriage is better. Like he makes me more creative, and I am more successful at work when I am that way. And so that the value of that, and it's taken some deprogramming, but like that everything he brings to the table is worth way more than an hourly wage. And trying to navigate that is just, I don't know, it's been kind of freeing in general. Yeah. And I don't know, had the pandemic not happened, if we would have come to those conclusions. And I'm not sure Dallin's totally there yet. We grew up in a very patriarchal society, you know, like the man's the breadwinner, and like, you know, but like I love what I do, and I love making the money, and I'm money motivated. So it's like, why not? Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, who cares who's the one paying the bills?
I felt that. I mean, I just spent the last 5 years of my life not paying the bills, and I'm very excited about making money, and the idea that I can give my wife freedom to not have to do that feels, and maybe it's a patriarchal thing, you know, I don't know where that comes from, but maybe it's just about helping out each other.
Yeah, you know, is lovely too. Like, and maybe I wouldn't be this inclined had he not made a salary the last 2 years, and he's the one we've had health benefits through, and you know, like there's been a lot of positives to him having a salary, but at the end of the day, I think it's just been so eye-opening, like having Dallin around in the capacity he is right now has just been very lovely. So
I think for me, like, obviously, yes, like, we're all, especially people who grow up in the societies that we do, like, you know, with like either, you know, we're in Utah, right? So there's Mormon culture and there's all that sort of stuff that can be very like structured and patriarchal and all that. There's going to be that programming that's inside of men who grow up in that society that they need to be providers. But I think that honestly, and the thing that I hope to get over, and I just don't know how or when, but there's this massive guilt I feel, because, and it's not guilt that I'm not providing, it's guilt that it's like, I found a partner who is totally fine supporting me, and I know that not every creative person, and especially there's going to be a lot of people who are way more creative and better artists than me who won't find that, and therefore we won't see what they do. You know what I mean? Like, that's big. Or if we do, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? They may be able to create something, but it's like we won't see it, you know? And that sort of stuff keeps me up at night. Like, what what kind of art are we missing out on because our society is set up the certain way it is? Like, I'm not good enough to, like, merit the sort of thing that's like, somebody is supporting me through this, yet I have it. And there's, like, guilt that comes from that, you know?
You know, this gets back to, like, the idea of community, but, like, just the idea that you have one person. Just having one person in your corner that shares like a vision with you about what you want life to be, I think that's like such a big transformation. That's such a big step. Just to have. Did you guys ever see Dawn Wall? Did you ever see that movie?
What?
The Dawn Wall? Have you not seen the Dawn Wall?
The Dawn Wall, like DAWN Wall.
Yeah, yeah. It's about two climbers climbing this impossible climb.
I watched that.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay,
I have not.
The Dawn Wall.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the best movies I think I've ever seen about relationships.
Cool.
Like these two climbers and the way that they're doing this impossible thing, but the way that they are just like so committed to each other. Like it was really transformative, I think, like for me as far as like how I was in my relationship with Annie, but like watching you guys, like the way you guys talk about your relationship, like reminds me of that same feeling I got from watching them climb. You need to watch this, Dallin. It's such a moving film. I mean, it's amazing documentary. It's Jimmy Chin directed it. Same guy that did Meru. You know,
Meru, and he filmed that new one.
Not The Last Descent. What was that one where the guy climbed Free Solo? I saw his two most recent films.
Yeah.
Wait, did he do?
His wife was he didn't direct. Producer on.
Maybe he didn't direct this one. Maybe he just did Free Solo. For some reason, I thought he did Dawn Wall. I actually do. Yeah, Meru I love too, but I think Dawn Wall is actually better than Free Solo as far as like what it says about kind of this relationship with these two climbers. But yeah, I mean, you can like do some pretty amazing things in life if you have like the right people in your corner, you know. So
look at us ending on a sappy note. How lovely.
Sappy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway. Yeah, that's probably a good place to end, isn't it, guys?
Oh yeah, sorry. I kind of called the ending.
I don't
have the authority to do that.
You're fucking house man. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, but no, I mean that's the story. That's the story of Avrec Art House, Artist Foundry, and what we're doing now.
Story is as old as time, so won't be the first time, won't be the last. So. Well, anyway, guys, thank you for sharing your home and sharing the story with me. Like, that's been awesome to like open up so much and let me see inside. So I appreciate that. And man, I'm excited to see what happens with Avrec, whatever, because it's not just it's the community, but it's also like the thing you guys do. And so
it's a word that definitely describes our filmmaking endeavors.
Yeah. And it'll keep going. We just aren't sure what it looks like yet.
What it looks, you guys, you're kind of one of those like in between areas where there's possibilities and they haven't quite coalesced yet. So
right, yeah, cool. We'll have to do a part 2 once we figured out our lives.
For sure. All right, awesome guys, thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.